what I do know is that in the labor, when the divisions and fights that internally take place between the labor movement, is that they're well beyond the capacity of the workers who actually, and the people on the ground that are impacted by doing the work. One thing is that those are constitutional changes, and they need to take place on a floor in a convention made up of all the bodies of the people. So it's not that it's a simple solution that can occur, and that in that regard, outside we cannot be divided. In fact, I think that there's really great ways that Jordan touched on, is the ways that you're building councils of workers in the community, regardless of where you are. Unless you're an owner, you're a worker, right? And there's a large percentage of people that don't think of themselves as workers, that with their brains or their muscle, they actually contribute and make the value of what we have in society. And we don't often connect that. And there are tremendous organizing drives that are taking place, but let's remove the kind of bureaucratic stuff that holds us back to what we really can contribute and accomplish. And that does occur. It does occur because it's proven to happen when workers are utilizing that time and energy.
What is your position on a local scale being compared to U.S. firms? Is there a sense of cooperation would be the next step? Because we saw that during the last round of bargaining in 2016, the UAW president and Jerry Dias actually talked together. So I don't know if there's a trend toward reconciliation, because you face a global capital, and you face corporations that are saying that Canada, wages are too high compared to the U.S. So I want to know. From your point of view at the local level.
From my point of view, which is I'm not a representative of the local executive or the shop committee, so I'll put it in that capacity. I'm not at the bargaining table. But what I can tell you is that this is exactly the demand that we're going to be competitive with anyone in North America is the fact. The reason why that Canada can continue to invest in General Motors. They only have 2 facilities left in the country. So we either have to respond and talk about what is the impact, what is the outcomes if they don't invest here, and utilizing the technology, the engineering, all of the great minds, the good healthcare, that people show up to work. It's huge contributions that they don't even factor that in terms of the value of the cost of labor, because it's far less. In regards to that, though, there is a broken opportunity for them to invest. So they have one plant in Ingersoll and one plant in Oshawa. If we're not there, if it's not, let us know. Let us know that they're not going to be here, and people can make a decision about how we transform the economy and transform our community in that regard, right? But they could be very upfront by saying that, right? It's not going to impact the people that are currently. It will impact the people that are currently working there, but it'll actually give them the advance notice of where they choose to go into the future and what their community will do as well. I think that's the least it can do.
Do you think one of the problems with what's going on in the fights for unions and everything, because we don't have any scab labor, as you know, Unifor right now in Ontario, they had 2 strikes, and the reason why they were on strike is, and they couldn't settle quick enough because they had scabs in there. Until we took over their facilities, that's when they got a contract. The same thing happened in Gander, Newfoundland. They were out almost 2 years. Yeah, 20 months. So until they took over their facility, kept the scabs out. That's what happened. And then there was a strike in Owen Sound by OPSU, and they had scabs in there. So I understand that unions have a right to say we're going on strike, or companies have the right to say, hey, we're locking you out because we don't have a deal. But there shouldn't be any rights for the companies to hire scabs. They should be able to be a law in place and never be able to take out of there the labor laws of not negotiating fairly with the companies that are hiring scabs. So I don't know. And even with 75 with the condominiums, you guys have got some good language in your last few contracts about that. And it's almost like what you're talking about, the fight, so.
But I think the question about scabs is a good one that kind of gets to the point that I'm trying to make, which is that if we look at the history of unionism, that, you know, the point of strike was not as a protest to have a voice, you know, workers' voices being heard. It was to halt production and put economic pressure on the employer. And then when that didn't work because of scabs, the picket was invented as a tactic to ensure that production remained halted. And now with, the post-war kind of legal framework, we have very, clear sets of activity that we engage in that often, and again, venting a bit of my own frustrations coming out of this York strike, feel a lot like theater and pageantry, where the point is to kind of check the box, you have the authorization vote, you have bargaining, then you do all the things, and then you kind of say, well, now we have to just see what happens. And that actual agency and the ability to put those kind of economic pressure, bring those economic pressures to employers is hampered in a lot of ways. And so what does it mean even if that was successful for a certain period, the fact now that there is no anti-scab legislation, I think means we need to figure out what to do.
In my industry, we work in the airport. One of the ways I think our union's been successful is regardless of who has the contract, we're a trade union, and we're a hiring hall. So regardless of who I work for, I make the same amount of money, same benefits, my pension's controlled by the union, my healthcare is controlled by the union. Is there a push with the Workers' Council to start moving towards that model? I like that the Workers' Council is more focused on rank and file membership. Are the unions that are there recognizing that the rank and file membership that's there, regardless of who has the contract, are the ones that are going to be continuing the fight going forward? Are the unions switching with the workplaces? Are the unions remaining? And is the council sort of addressing that with the GTAA, saying, we can change contracts, but the contract for the worker and for the unions that are there have to remain the same?
As the question about are the unions moving towards a kind of recognition of the fact that membership maybe needs to be transferable, I think unfortunately not, because this gets right to the core of the competitive nature of the labor movement, which is that the unions, unfortunately, even if there's an idea that density is good and it's good to have lots of unionized workers, there is a zero-sum issue of membership, which is that if a member goes to another organization, that's a loss of dues and a loss of member. It doesn't matter that density at the airport remains high. And so that's a problem. And so the unions and the airport council are all fighting for successor rights to be brought into legislation, which means that workers will get to inherit their unions and their working conditions and wages and all that kind of stuff if their contract flips. But in the absence of that, no, it means it's kind of the Wild West. Sometimes unions get recertified, sometimes they don't, sometimes unions switch. And
that's that.
Yeah.
That's that.
So we had a recent provincial election, and data suggests that about a third of union members voted for the right-wing ideas cloaked in populism. And we know that a lot of hotel workers, a lot of airport workers, and a lot of GM workers live in ridings that voted conservative. Are you able to tell what the impact of worker organizing is on the likelihood of your union members to vote in their class interest?
I think that what generally happens is that people are fooled by false slogans. They simply, the party that's in power in Ontario was able to convince people that they had a business deal to sell them and they have incredible savings. I'll sell you something, you get 10% off. Everybody's like, as consumers, they're like, yes, that's great, I'm going to save 10%. So I'm going to vote right here. What the failure is, they actually talk about what we collectively should do that. And I don't think that many people don't reflect themselves in the lens of working class and what is in the best interest of all of collective society. maybe we don't talk about it enough, or maybe the message isn't getting far enough. But that's it. It's like a big shift towards consumerism that if you save money, that's the place to go. And if people are used to that on an everyday basis, they consciously will make that decision at election time as well.
Can I just piggyback on that last question? To what extent can we also see this in terms of the fragmentation between the rank and file and the union hierarchy, as demonstrated through what happened with UPS, the teacher strike, etc.? To what extent is there a disconnect? Can we read these types of political actions, and similar things happened in the US, although they are certainly over-exaggerated to some extent? To what extent can we see this also in terms of the conversation about fragmentation we had earlier, and read that also in terms of UPS and teachers, etc., in terms of the disconnect potentially?
Yeah, I would actually, reach back to, the keynote address earlier, right? And some of the limitations to the fact that social democratic parties over the last 2 decades haven't differed in terms of their ideological closeness to neoliberal ideas from, parties that traditionally have been not worker parties. So I took a cab just, last week, and I talked to the cab driver. I said, well, like, how's your day been? He's like, oh, I just started, but business is terrible. Uber and Lyft, it's just like everything is, there's too much traffic now, and they take all of our business. John Turner is awful. He's awful. Like, he ruined it for us. I said, yeah, I hear. And then he said, yeah, and I really hope that Doug Ford is going to help us. I think he's going to help us. I think Doug Ford, and I was like, whoa. And that was one of those moments where I realized, like, okay, there's a lot of education, a lot of explaining to do, but I wouldn't necessarily, I would also, there are limits and challenges and roles for unions to play in this, but there are also limited challenges and roles for parties to play in this, right? And what we heard earlier, that the liberals can outflank the NDP in elections on the left, and then that has to tell us something. I'm from Germany. I was at an event last week. The Chemical Workers Union, a large union, posed a question saying that like the AfD, which is like the anti-immigration, right-wing, far-right party in Germany that is moving into parliament everywhere, our members see themselves reflected in the policy platforms of the AfD, and what do we tell our members as a leadership, right? They are these kind of, they want us to work with the AfD because they think they're going to get things done, and the social democratic parties haven't done anything for us, right? And I think that's sort of like, I'm from the Ruhr area, which is the heartland of industrial capital in Europe, and it's a stronghold of the social democratic party there. And people are fed up with it, and they have nowhere to go. And the Linke in Germany is not getting any votes, but the AfD in Germany is getting lots of votes. And coming back to Toronto, seeing that 25,000 people voted for Faith Goldie, I think there's a lot of work to be done, in our movement, but also in relation to the pressure we put onto governments and